Today on Bridge City News, police are searching for 3 men armed with a taser who violently kidnapped a 22-year-old man in York, Ontario yesterday. Terrified cruise ship passengers were rescued by helicopter in rough seas off the coast of Norway as the boat ran into engine troubles. And the president of Brazil met for the first time with his American counterpart Donald Trump this week and also received prayer from U.S. evangelical leaders. We have a special report. I'm Paul Arthur with the weekend edition of Bridge City News. It was a great night for the 32nd annual Moonlight Run yesterday in Lethbridge. 2,252 runners from across Alberta, as well as some from BC and Montana, finished the 6 and 10 kilometer races. The run featured participants ranging from elementary school kids all the way to 3 brave octogenarians, 80 years plus. Roughly $200,000 was raised for various Southern Alberta charities. Alberta's Police Oversight Unit has been called in after Calgary police say one of their officers shot a man yesterday. Police say they were responding to a report of an armed home invasion, and they say officers arrived and found 2 men allegedly attempting to flee in a vehicle. They say there was a confrontation and an officer shot the driver. He was taken to hospital and is in critical but stable condition. Police north of Toronto are asking for the public's help to find a 22-year-old kidnapping victim and his armed kidnappers. Wan Zhenlu, who is a Chinese national studying in Canada, was approached by 3 men yesterday at 6 p.m. and was shocked multiple times by a taser gun in the underground parking garage of his condominium. The men then dragged him into a black Dodge Caravan. The woman who was with Liu was not injured, but has been traumatized by the incident. Police say they are very concerned for Liu's safety. Global Affairs Canada says it is in contact with Florida officials after 2 Canadian citizens were found dead in their mobile home on Friday. The Broward County Sheriff's Office released a report to local media outlets stating that it is treating the deaths as a double homicide. The 2 victims have been identified as Mark and Rita Gagne. The Alberta NDP is criticizing the UCP's newly appointed candidate in Calgary Mountain View over past comments allegedly promoting conversion therapy. Something the candidate is denying. Jeremy Wong has been a pastor at the Calgary Chinese Alliance Church for years and has also been criticized for a sermon in which he talked about wives submitting to their husbands. Many of Alberta's political parties have been trying to make these kinds of comments into wedge issues, but so far it hasn't put a dent into the commanding lead in the polls the UCP currently enjoys. The University of Regina says its faculty association has given notice it plans to go on strike Thursday. In an email sent to students, the university administration says the notice was issued immediately following a town hall meeting Friday between students and the university regarding concerns over possible job action. University Provost Thomas Chase says the strike notice does not necessarily mean there will be a strike. Bargaining is scheduled to continue tomorrow and Tuesday. A civil trial is set to begin tomorrow for 2 doctors accused of ignoring an elderly man's wishes to stay alive and allegedly imposing a do not resuscitate order without consulting him or his substitute decision maker. The $2.2 million suit against Dr. Donald Livingston and Dr. Martin Chapman accuses the physicians of negligence or malpractice in the death of Second World War veteran Douglas Daguerre. Andrew Scheer used his appearance yesterday at the Manning Conference in Ottawa to promise that a Conservative government would balance the federal budget, but he didn't say when. The Conservative leader was also asked to comment on Islamophobia.
So yes, we will balance the budget. Justin Trudeau thought the budget would balance itself. We now see what happens with that. A lot of people say, well, how? Well, there's been such rapid increases in the rate of growth of government spending that we can get a lot of the way there just by restricting the growth of government spending back closer to inflation and population growth. We have a window this October that we can limit the damage and get back to balanced budgets over a shorter period of time.
Andrew Scheer has never said the word Islamophobia. Why?
I don't believe that's true. We had a motion in the House of Commons the other day where all parties supported that. You know, anybody who uses terms to try to paint a broad brush against an entire group of people, you know, you know, I reject anyone who would, you know, who would speak out based on Islamophobic principles. To me, the important thing is to speak out against those who in any way give oxygen or space to those who are trying to promote one group of people over the other. People who come to Canada, whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, atheists, want to come here to live their life. And our charter and our constitution and our conventions protect people from all walks of life to enjoy the freedoms that we have here in Canada.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, meanwhile, was doing a town hall meeting on the weekend and answered questions about the SNC Lavalin affair in Thunder Bay.
Government is always filled with really difficult decisions and difficult choices. And this was a situation in which there was a pretty serious difference of opinion and perspective on the best way forward. And everyone involved was trying to do the right thing in terms of trying to make sure that we're protecting good jobs and protecting workers right across the country at the same time as we're respecting the rules of our institutions and respecting the independence of the rule of law. And as we move forward on that, it's not always going to happen the best ways, and certainly this has been a difficult situation. I've sort of said, well, we're going to have to agree to disagree on these various perspectives, and we're going to have to keep focusing on the things that really matter most to Canadians in their daily lives. Part of which is, yes, respect for our institutions and the rule of law, but as was said many times throughout this, the rule of law has been entirely upheld. Our institutions continue to stand strong in this country. There was no breaking of laws anywhere in this, and nobody is saying that. So we also have to get to the business of governing.
The chairman of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee says Democrats won't wait months for the Justice Department to release Special Counsel Robert Mueller's full report on his Russia-Trump investigation. Gerald Nadler says the public deserves to see the underlying evidence, not just a summary of conclusions to make their own judgments. Attorney General William Barr says he will provide that summary soon. A Viking Ocean cruise ship that got stranded in bad weather with engine problems off of Norway's western coast evacuated about half of the 1,300 passengers on board by using helicopters to airlift them one by one to safety. Passengers say it was a terrifying experience as the ship had been dealing with 8-meter-high waves which crashed through some of the doors and windows, injuring 20 people. Those rescue efforts have now been suspended as crews have since managed to tow the boat safely to port. New Zealanders are debating the limits of free speech after their chief censor banned a 74-page manifesto written by the man accused of slaughtering 50 people at 2 Christchurch mosques. The ban means anybody caught with the document on their computer could face up to 10 years in prison, while anybody caught sending it could face 14 years. Some say the ban goes too far and risks lending both the document and the gunman mystique. The president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, met for the first time with his American counterpart Donald Trump this week. During his visit to Washington, D.C., Bolsonaro also met with American evangelical leaders who prayed for him. We have a special report from the Global News Alliance.
The president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, visited the White House to meet for the first time his American counterpart, Donald Trump. The two leaders held a bilateral meeting in which one of the principal topics was the crisis in Venezuela.
Brazil has been an extraordinary leader in supporting the Venezuelan people's efforts to reclaim their liberty and their democracy. Brazil has helped so much. Along with the United States, Brazil was one of the first nations to recognize Venezuela's legitimate interim president, Juan Guaido.
In an interview with the US-based Christian Broadcasting Network, Bolsonaro acknowledged the support of Brazilian evangelicals that helped him win the presidential election in his country.
Evangelical Christians in Brazil account for 1/3 of the population, going up. I had massive support from evangelical Christians in Brazil, and up until recently, they had no one to support, actually. No one who would be willing to behave or express the kind of faith that was in line with theirs. When I emerged in the political scene as a Catholic, and above all as a Christian, I became a natural choice on the part of the evangelical leaders who also wanted change and did not accept or did not want a return of the left wing or the Workers' Party to the federal administration. So yes, the evangelical Christians were extremely important during my election, for my election.
The Brazilian president confirmed that he experienced several miraculous moments during the political campaign that put him in power.
I'm doing well. As you all know, I was the victim of an assassination attempt. A professional killer actually stabbed me and twisted the knife into my stomach, but thank God I have recovered. So that was miracle number one. The second miracle was about the conditions under which my election or campaign was carried out in Brazil. Very little airtime, very little money available, and we nevertheless came out victorious. So at this point in time, I ask God to give me more than just wisdom, but courage to make wise decisions that are in the interest of the Brazilian people.
Jair Bolsonaro also met with a group of American evangelical leaders. They prayed for him and expressed their common goal to defend traditional values. The prayer was led by Pat Robertson, founder of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
That he may have wisdom, that he will hear a voice at his ear when he turns to the right or to the left, saying, "This is the way, walk ye in it."
The leaders also praised Bolsonaro for openly holding to his Christian beliefs. Javier Bolaños for the Global News Alliance.
Forum between Brazil and the U.S.
Recapping one of our top news stories, police are searching for 3 men armed with a taser who violently kidnapped a 22-year-old man in York, Ontario this morning. And a look at weekend weather. The rain mixed with snow should end this evening, then clearing, but there will be some fog patches developing overnight once again with a low of -5. But looking good for tomorrow, sunshine with a southwest wind at 30 and a high of 13 degrees. Chiropractic care is often used to help people recover from serious car accidents, and some are now using shockwave therapy to treat patients, including Dr. Jeff Hedrick. Hal Roberts has that interview coming up. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come for a special celebration event called Gideon's Banquet on Friday, April 12th, beginning at 6:30 p.m. at My Victory Lethbridge, hosted by the Gideon's Lethbridge chapter. Enjoy an evening of delicious food, fellowship, live music featuring Carlin Fair and family, plus see a special screening of the powerful documentary, The Samson Project. Tickets are $25 each, and to purchase, contact Bill at 403-328-4244. Get your dance shoes on and learn East Coast Swing. The Swing Bridge Dance Club meets Mondays at the Eagles Hall from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. Come by yourself or with a partner. Beginner to expert levels are welcome. For more details, call Sheldon at 403-393-8566 or email swingbridgeleth@gmail.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
You know, it's been said many times over and over again, if you don't have your health, you really don't have anything. The good news is that research and technology is always being developed to improve your health. Today we're going to talk about chiropractic health and treatments and a unique treatment used by some Olympians to treat pain and injuries. Joining me now at the desk is Dr. Jeff Hedrick. He's a Lethbridge chiropractor specializing in shockwave therapy. Welcome to BCN, Dr. Jeff.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Hal. I really appreciate the invitation.
You bet.
And I love talking about chiropractic, so I'm looking forward to this.
So what are chiropractors really able to help a lot of people with?
Well, the question you're asking is a pretty large question. Chiropractic is a large profession, and it has a big scope of practice. So many of the issues that people face when they come to see a chiropractor are pain-related, and some of them are not so much pain-related, but perhaps nutrition-related. So there are multiple types of barriers that we try to address to improve the healing.
I know when I had my car accident many years ago, about 6-7 years ago, chiropractic treatment helped me a lot, keep the spine properly aligned. That's pretty important, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, we're walking around in an upright in a gravitational field, and just the sheer wear and tear of gravity and time on our bodies takes its toll.
How important is chiropractic treatment when it comes to helping somebody with migraines, constant headaches?
Migraines are a very debilitating disease, and I guess you could call it a disease because there's many factors that underlie these conditions. I read at one time that there are about 80 causes for headaches.
Wow.
And so it's pretty hard to pinpoint any one issue, but chiropractic does have good success with certain types of migraines.
So what would a patient expect to take place in their very first visit with a chiropractor? You do an assessment at that point in time?
Exactly. We like to do a thorough case history. So we're going to look at the familial history or the history of the present illness. We're going to look at the type of onset that they've had with the condition. And we're probably going to get into some examinations, a little bit of testing. We call it provocative testing to see if we can reproduce some of the symptoms.
Some people I speak to, they say, I'm not going to go see a chiropractor. They're going to snap my neck, crack my neck, and they get a little nervous about it, right? I'm going to be paralyzed, you know, I can't leave the office. So how do you put people's fears at ease, Dr. Jeff?
Well, that is a great question. I'm not sure that I have the best answer for it at all, but basically I talk to people about their problem. And I'm concerned, you know, I've had my own issues and I like to identify with them and let them know that I understand their fears, their misconceptions, maybe some of their misgivings and things like that. And then we just talk about the options that we have for treating it. And of course, I always explain the process that I'm going to do and make sure that they're comfortable with it before we proceed. And in most cases, people realize that they can't go on the way that they're feeling now, and that they have to go through a little bit of a treatment to get the issues resolved.
When we're driving a car, we can always tell if our vehicle needs a realignment. You know, a lot of times the tires are going bald on the inside, the outside. You need a realignment. How can we tell with our body when we need a realignment?
Another great question. Some people wait till the point that they have pain. Pain, there's no such thing as a good pain, we'll say that for sure. It's definitely a warning, but it's not the actual problem. So you really have to get into measurement to find out if there is something going on in the person's body.
So how can you really help when it comes to the manipulation, when it comes to a person's back, like the lower back, the central part of the back, and the upper back?
Depending on what type of a procedure that the chiropractor is using, we can treat just about any area, maybe not necessarily from that area, because we look for other restrictions to the function and perhaps some other tissues that are involved that have a referred pain or projection of pain. So we do get in there and we can treat manually with the manipulations or soft tissue treatments. There's a lot of types of chiropractic out there, and they can address a big variety of issues.
Can chiropractic treatment also help with irritable bowel syndrome?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that the answer is probably. There are quite a few issues that are related to that in the spine, and not every one of them, I'm sure. And that's the nice part about chiropractic, though, is that, you know, anything that's related to the spine is definitely going to get better, and anything that's not related is still going to be persistent afterward. And it helps the people sort out some of the causes that they may have for those issues.
So explain to our viewers then, Dr. Jeff, how you incorporate shockwave therapy into your treatments.
Well, shockwave therapy has been a transformative procedure in my clinic. I didn't know that there was so much that I wasn't really good at until I got that into my office and started working with multiple conditions. So now I'm looking at a lot of people. Well, I used to have people come to my office and they'd come in for a specific problem, but I'd notice that they'd also have knee or hip pain or an elbow issue, and I didn't really have a great treatment to offer them. And then once I got the shockwave therapy in there and started using that, I found that I could treat a lot more conditions. So I'm always on the lookout for what type of a problem a person has. And of course, you know, trying to get the word out and let people know about what shockwave can do has brought in a whole new bunch of people to the office. So
and Olympic athletes have used this as well with some of their injuries. Yeah,
there's a lot of athletic application for this type of a procedure. And pro sports, they're using this extensively. Now they travel with physiotherapists or chiropractors and sometimes even their own personal physicians, and they use all types of modalities out there, but shockwave is becoming very, very prominent out there.
So how does it actually work then, doctor?
Excellent question. Shockwave therapy was actually developed to break down kidney stones while they're still inside the body.
Wow.
So this high pressure acoustic wave can penetrate deep into the tissue. And what it does is it recreates the initial stages of the injury. And those initial stages are what signal the body to start the healing and repair cycle. So they have different chemical signalers in them. They also help to stimulate new blood vessel development, change the metabolic activity of cells, and generally work with the body's own processes to enhance and promote healing in the area.
So what actually changes in the body as a result of the acoustic waves that are being administered to us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, basically it's just kick-starting the body's healing cycles. The body has certain reactions to different type of forces that are introduced to it. We know that a pressure wave coming into the body will stimulate new blood vessel development. We also know that the bones in the body respond to the stresses of standing, running, and jumping, and that high pressure wave can be brought in there to improve the turnover of the bone cells, which makes it stronger. Also, there's a big influence in the lymphatic system. The shock wave is able to gently press out that lymphatic fluid, and that is a big promoter of healing, something that's not as well known as it should be.
How long does a shockwave treatment generally take, and is it painful?
Yeah, this is a question I get all the time.
Right.
Shockwave is not necessarily a pleasant experience. It does have a little bit of an ouch factor to it.
No pain, no gain?
Right, very true, no pain, no gain.
Right.
And in fact, we want a little bit of a pain because pain is another signaler the body uses to alert the brain that there's a problem with the tissue. And of course, the brain is what's going to react and coordinate that healing and repair in there. So yeah, a little bit of pain is helpful, but you only have to endure it for about 5 to 7 minutes.
And how many treatments would you suggest somebody undergo when it comes to shockwave therapy?
Well, this is the art of treating anybody and their condition, and all that is based on a number of factors. It could be the age of the person, it could be the duration of the complaint that they've had, the severity. So many factors go into there. We try to start out with a rule of thumb. If a problem is pretty new, I like to start in a 3 to 5 range. But if it's chronic, it could be 5 to 8, maybe 10 or 12 sessions to get some good results out of that.
Do we have any studies as well about potential side effects down the road?
There are studies out there about side effects, and this is where we like to alert people to the 2 different types of shockwave therapy. There is a radial shockwave therapy that is a pretty low pressure level. And that pressure level is really not capable of producing any damage in there. And then there's a focused shockwave therapy, which is a very high level pressure, and it has some potential to produce some hematoma and something inside of like a blood clot, or not clot, but pooling of blood within a tendon.
How about carpal tunnel syndrome? We hear that quite often. How can you help people with carpal tunnel?
Carpal tunnel is probably my least favorite condition to see.
Oh, do tell. Do tell.
It's stubborn. I don't know. There must be multiple factors involved in this condition. I see some good results with adjusting the wrist. We restore the arch into that carpal tunnel, and I don't use shockwave on it. I have used acupuncture and had some good results with it. But the severity of that condition sometimes leaves a person with no other option than surgery.
Wow. Now, how about proper posture? How important is that?
Well, I'm glad you reminded me of that because I'm sure that I've been slouching a little bit
And Mom's
myself.
probably watching, right? Come on, son.
Yeah.
Stomach in, chest out, head back.
Yeah.
But how important really is that to overall health?
It's a really great question. There are really 2 types of posture that are happening in our body. There's one that's subconscious that we don't think about, and that's really an alignment posture, and that has to do with the function of the spine and the health and the position of the vertebrae. And then of course there's our conscious posture that we can think about and correct ourselves. And I think it's very important because now we're seeing the arrival of a lot of conditions such as text neck, people sitting like this, texting too much,
Text neck, right.
or gamers. And they're getting a curve going the wrong direction in their neck, and it's producing a lot of downstream health problems and possibly even damage to the spinal cord and the cervical spine.
Would some of the nerves be pinched as well, perhaps?
They are interfered with, not necessarily pinched. They can be tractioned or stretched.
Okay.
And so can the blood vessels in the area and produce what we call an ischemia, which is a lack of blood supply. And of course, anytime we lose blood to an area, that's not a good thing for us.
What about pillows? Some people love the big fluffy pillows, filled, down-filled pillows. Other people say I need the chiropractic foam pillows with the curvature of my neck and my head. What do you suggest? What do you recommend? Or is everyone different?
Yeah, excellent question. Pillows, I don't know if there is really a firm answer to the pillow, hard or soft. But I caution people to use the curved pillows as more of a therapeutic treatment. Not necessarily something to sleep on, but something that you can use to help restore the curvature in the neck. And then when we're sleeping at night, we're probably going to shift it into an odd position anyways. So the pillow really comes down to a trial and error type of an issue.
How about when it comes to footwear and shoes, proper footwear? Should we use orthotics? Some orthopedic surgeons I've spoken with in the past, Dr. Jeff, they say no orthotics, bare feet is actually the best route to go. In and around the office, what are your thoughts?
Well, this is an excellent question, and that is a really important issue to look at with a person. I do see people who have some arches that are collapsing and they need the support. And then there are other people who don't have that problem, and of course they don't need the support. So the question really becomes, do we want to create a crutch in there, or do we want to try and rehabilitate the problem back to a natural position? Preventing the fall of the arch is important, and I think bare feet's a little bit better to prevent that than other type of footwear.
So if the arch has already fallen, it's too late?
Probably too late, and it's going to need some support.
Gotcha, okay. How about proper diet, vitamins, and supplements? How important are they for our overall back health?
Well, we can look at it certainly for our overall health, and certainly our spine too. Anytime we encounter an injury, we have to have the proper nutrition to heal and repair that. When you're going to go build a wall, you need to take the bricks and mortar with you, otherwise nothing's going to get done. And I didn't used to put too much emphasis on this in the past until I met a chiropractor who had been working through the 50s and 60s.
Wow.
And he said to me, you have no idea how much of a struggle you're facing right now. When we used to adjust people, you could almost raise the dead because the only barrier was the physical barrier of the spine. They didn't have a nutritional deficit. Now we have depleted soils and chemically manufactured foods, and these are all not providing the nutrition that we need for proper healing and repair.
Dr. Jeff Hedrick, Lethbridge chiropractor specializing in shockwave therapy. Thanks a lot for joining me today on Bridge City News.
Thank you very much, Hal. I appreciate it.
Does God still speak to people today? If so, how does he do this? And how can we discern whether it's actually God speaking to us? And if God is in fact speaking, will we obey his word? To talk more about this is Pastor Kelly Williams, Senior Pastor of Vanguard Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and author of the book, The Mystery of 23, God Speaks. Pastor Kelly, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hal, thank you very much for having me.
You bet. Sometimes God asks people to do very strange things, and your story has a few strange twists on it. Can you give a brief overview of your story?
Yes. I, in February of 2001, woke up from a evening of sleep at 1:23 a.m. in the morning, and I looked over the clock. That's why I knew what time it was, and I began to see a vision. This vision wasn't real clear to me, and quite honestly, it kind of weirded me out a bit because I grew up Southern Baptist. I'm a graduate of Liberty University and Dallas Theological Seminary, and of course, they told me these sorts of things weren't supposed to happen, so I was trusting that I wouldn't experience anything like this. But I also tell people I grew up Baptist-Costal, and people say, well, what's that? I say, well, I've just been confused all my life. So because I have good friends that say, visions are for today, and I have good Christian friends that say they aren't. And in the midst of this, I experienced this vision. I didn't know what to do with it, so I ignored it. but I kept having it. It kept occurring at 1:23 a.m. in the morning. And so eventually I started writing it down in my journals. I got to a place to where I shared it with my wife, Tasha. And then eventually I shared it with my elder board because I didn't know what else to do because it kept occurring. And my elders encouraged me to go to this pastor. In the vision, there was a pastor that was doing things he shouldn't be doing in his private life, and God wanted me to talk to him about it. And so I didn't know this pastor, so I scheduled a lunch to get to know him. I knew of him. He did not know who I was. Sat down with him, got to know him, and eventually I asked him if I could share some things with him. I met with him. I read him my journals, and privately he confirmed that what God had revealed to me was true. And so I encouraged him to get help. He told me he wanted about a week to talk to his wife and that he would be in touch. And then about a week later, he called me from Detroit, Michigan, and I asked him what he was going to do. He said he had decided he was going to do nothing, and I said, I have to see this through, and so you're going to have to either give me a telephone number of spiritual authority I can discharge this to, or you're going to need to take the next steps in addressing this. And so he said he would call back, and eventually his chair elder called me. And in a couple of days, I found myself in a meeting where I shared these same things with his elders. And sadly, I didn't see this bus coming. He denied all of it. And in the midst of it, his elder board called for my repentance. And it pretty much crushed me. I had a couple of elders on my board that were present. This pastor's wife was present. And how I went home after that and just kind of collapsed in the floor. I told my wife, I'm done. If I heard from God, I heard wrong, or if I heard correctly, I didn't handle it correctly. And so that sent me into a very dark season in my life for about 5.5 years. And then on November 5th, 2006, many in the Colorado Springs community won't ever forget that day. It was plastered across the evening news, the world news, the international news, that this pastor had solicited a gay prostitute and that he had bought meth. And as I sat there and as I watched that, I said to myself, this never had to be. It never had to be like this. And I just want to encourage your watchers and your listeners, if you see a Christian man, a public figure, man or woman, fall publicly, just assume out of God's mercy and grace, he sent scores of people to try to help that person turn back before it was too late.
So, Pastor Kelly, you say that putting out a fleece is meant to be a tool to help guide our decisions, not to control them. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, you go back to the story of Gideon, and he put out a fleece to make sure that God wanted him to do something. Then he put out another one. You can see in the book of Acts where they were trying to decide who was going to take Judas Iscariot's spot, and they sort of draw straws, or they kind of roll dice. And so there are things in Scripture that cannot be a substitute for God's word, his spirit, or his people, or accountability. But certainly after you have got a sense that God is wanting you to do something, a fleece is something that's good to use to get confirmation. And fleeces are kind of like coincidences that God has ordered so that you can know that he has spoken to you.
So you had to make a choice yourself as whether or not to obey God, as to confront your friend. How did you justify it? How did you harmonize that?
Well, there was a lot of tension, Hal. I found it very difficult. And of course, you hear people say, don't touch God's anointed. And there's a variety of scriptures that I think oftentimes get taken out of context. And for me, it was very important that I listen to God's voice and do what he says. And I've learned, after 17 years of this, that regardless of the outcome, there is no substitute for God's obedience. And if God is asking you to do something, it may not turn out like you thought it would. It may turn out very poorly, but that does not mean that God does not want you to do something. And so I just encourage those that are watching, if God is calling you, especially to confront someone in sin that might be seen as successful or powerful, don't allow their success to cause you to talk yourself out of doing what God has asked you to do.
Did you ever doubt yourself as you're going through this journey?
about 1 trillion times. And I had to go back to God's word. I had to go back to those I was accountable to. And I had to say to them, have I done everything I'm supposed to do? Did I go about it the right way? And I think anyone who does what God asks them to do, if it doesn't turn out like you thought it would, you're going to have times of doubt.
So, Pastor Kelly, let me ask you something. Even though you confronted your friend who was caught in this sin, do you think maybe God was also putting you through a test?
Yes, I have very painfully learned that. Sometimes, because I said to the Lord when I watched him fall publicly, I said, Lord, this could have happened without me doing anything. And so I'm confused as to why you would bring me into a situation in such a strange and miraculous way. I would do all the things I did, carry all the weight I did for so long, and yet it turned out like as if I didn't even need to be a part of the equation. And I felt like that it was very clear to me. And one of the things that this friend of mine said to me along the way was one of the greatest tests of our character is how we handle someone else's sin in the public sector. And that has stuck with me, that God at times wants to teach us about ourselves through what we have to deal with through other people.
So why do you think it is sometimes we as people have a tendency of hardening our hearts and justifying our actions when we're confronted publicly?
Well, God said to Israel, you're sorry, but you're only sorry because you got caught. And it is very difficult for human nature to repent when it has been publicly shamed. And I just want to say to those that are watching, God does not want to publicly shame his children. He never desires to cause harm to us. He wants to redeem us. He wants to restore us. The sacrifice of Jesus Christ makes that very clear. But if we choose to ignore the promptings of the Holy Spirit and those he sends to help us, he will use whatever means necessary to get our attention because he loves us. But as I've watched with people who have to be caught publicly, it takes them much longer to come back to God because human pride gets in the way and creates a lot of complications along the way.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, can you explain for our viewers what you mean by spiritual PTSD?
Yes. I find I'm in a military town in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and people who come back from war find themselves traumatized by what they experienced in their past. And so for me, I found myself traumatized in the spiritual realm by what I had experienced through this situation with this pastor. And I found that I was caught in my past and the trauma was hindering me. And there were tremors of emotion that hindered me from being able to faithfully do in the present what God had called me to do.
Did you ever get angry at God during this journey that you went through?
I did get angry at God, but I more questioned myself and I more doubted whether or not I had gone about it the correct way. And so I second guessed myself and I felt a lot of shame, quite honestly, because of that, because I kind of felt like how that if God had revealed this to me and I had gone about it the right way, there would have been a different outcome. And so as I began to search the scriptures, one of the things that I began to learn is sometimes when you do what God asks you to do and it doesn't turn out like you thought it would, you feel a measure of shame. I think it's false shame. And the psalmist says that those that wait on the Lord shall not be put to shame. And so for me, I said, Lord, you're going to have to show me what it is and what you had in store and why you had me do this, because what I thought the purpose was turns out not to be the purpose.
You know, many Christian leaders have the mindset, do not judge anyone. But what does the Bible actually teach us about this?
Well, in a couple of places, Matthew 7 says that when you judge, be ready to be judged with the same measure. And so if you're going to confront someone about their sexual sin, you need to be ready to be confronted about your own sexual sin. But also the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 said that we're not to judge outsiders, unbelievers, and if we do that, we're in sin ourselves. But we are to hold one another accountable, and he does say we are to judge one another within the church and hold each other to to a standard of holiness. And I just want to say this, and I want to remind the American church, the Canadian church, we're not going to spend an eternity singing loving, loving, loving is God Almighty. We're going to spend an eternity singing holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, the one that was and is to come. His holiness matters that much to me.
Now, did this pastor friend of yours ever repent of his sins? Did he ever come back to you and ask for forgiveness for his treatment of you?
I don't know if he repented of his sins. I can't speak of that. But I do know that he has never come back to me to make amends, to thank me, or to reconcile how I tried to help him.
So what message are you really hoping people will take away from reading your book?
It is my hope that people will take away two messages. Number one, what we do for God matters. And in the end, it's all that matters. And so I want to challenge your people who are watching that when God calls you to do something, regardless of how difficult it is, obey and do it, regardless of the outcome, and trust that in God's timing, He will bless you for your obedience to Him.
Kelly Williams, author of The Mystery of 23, God Speaks. Thanks so much for joining me today from Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Hal, God bless you. Thank you very much.
This is Eating Disorders Awareness Week. Over the past couple of decades, it seems as though eating disorders have been on the rise. What causes an eating disorder? Is help readily available to help people get their lives back on track, leading a healthy lifestyle? Joining me now at the desk is Janet Innes, a mental health therapist with Alberta Health Services here in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Janet.
Thank you.
So are eating disorders really on the rise? How prominent are they today?
They're pretty prominent. I'd say over 1 million people in Canada meet the requirements for an eating disorder.
What causes a lot of eating disorders in young people today? Is it the stresses of maybe homework, social life, their family life, maybe their parents are stressing them out a little bit?
Yeah, stress can definitely be a contributing factor to eating disorders. Just dealing with overwhelming anxiety and emotion and the stressors of everyday life, for sure.
What are some of the symptoms? What should we really look out for as parents in case our daughter or our son has an eating disorder?
Look for chronic dieting talk, fat talk, over-exercising, and even, youth who are combining foods in an unusual way.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about when your daughter comes up to you and says, okay, gluten-free, dairy-free, all of a sudden it's like putting all this restrictions on herself when it comes to her diet.
Right.
Is that another warning sign as well?
It certainly can be, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not just females, but men can also have eating disorders as well, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Women and girls tend to ask for help more readily with eating disorders, and because of that, I think men and boys see it as more of a female problem, so they don't tend to ask for help, but it's definitely there.
Why is it more prominent when it comes to younger people as opposed to older people, eating disorders? Or do you see it as well in maybe seniors?
I do.
Right?
I do, yes.
Okay.
I think actually eating disorders can affect anybody. Anybody is at risk for eating disorders.
So why would a senior, who's enjoyed food for maybe 70, 80 years, decide all of a sudden to put all the restrictions on their own diet?
Well, firstly, they may not have enjoyed food for that long. They may have had the eating disorder for many, many years and just been struggling with it. There's so many reasons, and it's so complex that I think it depends on the person and what they're going through and what's triggered it. It can be lots of different things.
So Janet, is a lot of it to do with self-love? You have to love yourself and accept your body type for who you really are?
Actually, that's part of it.
Okay.
There's something called set point weight, and that's the weight that our bodies reach that's natural to our bodies, as natural as our shoe size or our height. And it's acceptance around that weight, right? So we might be, our goal weight might be very different than what our set point weight is. And the set point weight is where our bodies function the best. So it's really having acceptance of that, I think.
Sometimes people look at the BMI as well, the body mass index.
Yeah.
Like for me, 6'4", it says I should be maybe 189 pounds. I'm like, I haven't been that since grade 8, in school.
Yeah.
So, different body types, I mean, you shouldn't really necessarily go by that one BMI chart, should you?
No. I think we have many determinants of health, such as blood pressure, our energy, our stamina. Those are determinants of health, as well as weight. And weight is just a small indicator. So paying attention to these other determinants is really important.
Yeah, being heart healthy is very important, right? You can be a few pounds overweight, but as long as you have a strong heart.
Right.
And even my doctor says it's good to have an extra 10 or 15 pounds if you have to go in for major surgery. You can afford to lose the weight. But if you've only got 5 or 6% body fat, you can't afford to lose that weight with major surgery.
Right, yes.
What's the difference now, Janet, between anorexia versus bulimia?
Well, somebody who has anorexia is more restrictive in their eating, an intense fear of gaining weight. Somebody who has bulimia uses eating as a way to cope with anxiety, depression, strong emotion, stressors. Yeah. So.
And do they bring the food back up, like bulimics, or?
Yes, that they can definitely have a way of purging, but so can people with anorexia. It's very complicated.
What are some other eating disorders as well, outside of those two? Those are the ones we hear mostly in the media, right?
Right. In some ways, there's as many eating disorders as there are people. Wow. So there's so many variations on eating disorders, and whether people restrict or purge, but then there's others as well. It's hard to answer.
What are some of the dangers when it comes to eating disorders and how it negatively impacts our health?
Yes. Okay. Well, physical health, it can impact definitely our heart and our other organs.
You're a lot weaker, right?
Yeah. Your heart sometimes has to work a lot harder, but there's other areas that affect our health as well. Like, it's incredibly shaming to, people who have an eating disorder are intensely shameful about it, and that affects us socially because, we become more isolated and not wanting to reach out and talk about it. And yeah,
so is that key really then? If you feel that you have an eating disorder coming on, or you're wanting to take that path to reach out to maybe a family or friend or relative, and then maybe they can help lead you to a professional that can maybe help?
It is key. Yes, talking about it both will reduce the shame around it and as well help you get on the road to recovery.
How often is suicide attached to an eating disorder?
I think suicide is always a risk when it comes to a mental health diagnosis, mental health struggle. But with eating disorders, you are 12 times more likely to die. When we look at how it impacts your physical health, you're 12 times more likely to die because of that, right, than other mental health illnesses. Not necessarily die by suicide, but die because it impacts your physical health.
Now, the media must play a major role as well.
Yeah.
You look on television, you see people that have these super slim bodies, even the models, like Victoria's Secret's models, they look unhealthy, to be honest with you. They're, so is there like a negative stigma as well attached? That, maybe people already have a mindset like, I'm too fat already, compared to these airbrushed models, supermodels that we see on television or in magazines?
Right. Yeah, the biggest thing with media is, we can't really change it because it's been that way forever. And it probably is getting worse. So the biggest thing is media literacy. So helping people to understand, what are they selling? Why do they have that ad? Is that really how people look, or is that changed? Have they airbrushed it or changed it in some way? Right?
I like when I see plus size models.
Yeah.
To me, they just look like normal people.
Yes.
They're not plus size at all, right?
No.
So it's interesting. What about some of these diet fad products that you see, like this new lollipop? It's an appetite suppressing lollipop that promises a flat tummy. What are your thoughts when you hear advertisements or see advertisements like that?
There's always been those types of gimmicks, I would say. There's teas, there's candy, there's, you know, all kinds of things. But I think it's important to remember that those are very dangerous and they don't really work in the long term. We want a
long-term solution.
A long-term lifestyle that will carry us through our lives, right?
So who's really at the highest risk then of developing an eating disorder? We talked a little bit about young people, some seniors, but who else really? Maybe athletes?
Athletes are, sure. Maybe more in the sports such as ballet or gymnastics. But you know what, I think we all are. I think sometimes it can start with an innocent comment about your weight or shape that sets you off into a dangerous cycle. So none of us are immune to it, for sure.
So it's better to be a lot more supportive emotionally, mentally.
Right.
My father-in-law used to have a wonderful expression, may he rest in peace. I'm in pretty good shape considering the shape I'm in.
Right.
So
Yeah. Right.
But I mean, even to laugh at yourself once in a while, that's important, right?
Sure.
Learn
Yes.
to love yourself, laugh at yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, now how about treatments that are available to help people on the road to recovery?
Well, I think it starts with perhaps going to your family doctor, nurses, dietitians. We do have 2 major treatment centers in Alberta. So there's one in Calgary and there's one in Edmonton. Aside from that, there's counselors. So getting yourself a team, I think, is really important. A team of professionals.
And again, surrounding yourself with people who love you and believe in you for really who you are.
Right. Who can be supportive and non-judgmental, and not try to push you before you're ready. I think that's really important as well.
Oh, okay, so how do you know when you're ready? Is it like a smoker that says, you know what, I've had enough. I want to finally go out and get help with my smoking because I can't beat this on my own. You almost hit like a rock bottom. So is somebody with an eating disorder say, you know what, I have to hit rock bottom before I admit that I have a problem?
It's causing you more problems than it's helping you. I think when you see that, you're probably ready to make a change. And then getting help to make those changes is great. It's really helpful, yeah.
How successful are the treatment programs that are available at some of these centers in Calgary and Edmonton?
Yeah. Well, it's possible to recover from an eating disorder, but it's important to remember that it is very hard work. It requires a lot of patience because it's a very complicated illness. So it is possible. It's just you have to have people around you that are willing to be patient, and those treatment centers do really, really help to give you the information and skill that you need to recover.
Those people who are suffering from an eating disorder, do they have an accountability partner, and does that help?
I'm not sure. I think probably the most helpful we can be for people is letting them know that we're there for them, that we are not judging, that we're willing to be their sounding board if they need that, but we're supportive. And we're not going to push or give advice or quick answers, because that just gets people stuck, really.
And it puts up maybe the walls, they get really defensive.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, let me ask you something. You and I are working together, and I'll notice a change in your eating pattern, which may lead me to believe that you may have a disorder with your eating. So how would I best approach you if I care about you as my coworker to say, hey, Janet, something's not right here? What advice would you give me?
You know, I think it's probably better to zero in on, you know, you don't seem to have as much energy as you did before. You look a little paler, and when I see that, I feel worried. Rather than focus on it, I don't see you eating or you're losing weight. So we don't want to ever focus on food or body shape or weight, because that can lead us to more problems.
How about the spiritual side of things as well, Janet? Do people say, you know what, God really loves you for who you are, you know, and God doesn't make mistakes. So does that ever brought into the picture as well, the spiritual side? Instead of just the mental health, but also the spiritual side?
I think the spiritual side can be definitely affected, just like it can socially, emotionally, and physically. That definitely needs to be addressed if that's something that's important to that person.
Because not everyone's the same, and not everyone
That's right.
is struggling with these issues because of the same reason. We can't hit everyone with the same
No.
stroke, right?
No, that's right.
Okay. How about different cultures? Do you see higher tendencies of eating disorders, maybe here in North America, as opposed to, I don't know, other countries around the world?
You know, I'd have to look into that, but I know that Europe has a very high incidence of eating disorders as well. The United States, for sure. I don't know, but it would be very
So it's really
interesting.
Western civilization, right? A lot of the Western countries.
Yes. I would say so, but I'm not sure about that.
Janet Innes, mental health therapist with Alberta Health Services here in Lethbridge. Thanks so much for joining me today on BCN.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Have a great night.